There was a time when I thought I had it all figured out. A good job, a great reputation, and a loving wife, Jenna, who worked in the same corporation. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I was climbing the corporate ladder steadily, earning respect for my hard work. And, as luck would have it, my dedication didn't go unnoticed. It was about 2 years ago when my boss, Richard, called me into his office. The guy was larger than life, always talking a little too loud, always flaunting his expensive suits. But he had power, and people feared him. He leaned back in his leather chair, gesturing for me to sit. "Max," he began, a grin spreading across his face. "You've been killing it. Your numbers speak for themselves, and frankly, this company could use more guys like you." I nodded, trying to play it cool, though my chest swelled with pride. "Thank you, sir. I just do my best." "Well, your best has paid off." He tossed a folder across the desk. "This is your promotion. Effective immediately. You'll be overseeing regional accounts. Bigger salary, bigger office. You earned it." For a moment, I was speechless. This was the break I'd been waiting for. "Thank you. I won't let you down." He leaned forward, his tone shifting. "I'm counting on it. And keep this between us until it's official. We've got to keep the other sharks guessing, right?" I laughed politely, even though something about his smile felt off. I brushed it aside. Why wouldn't I? I had just scored a dream promotion. Fast forward a year later, and life was complicated. I loved my job, but working under Richard wasn't easy. The man was brilliant at business, but an absolute nightmare when it came to personal boundaries. He had this way of testing everyone, pushing buttons just to see how far he could go. Jenna had mentioned a few offhand remarks he'd made toward her, but I chalked it up to Richard being Richard. After all, she'd assured me she could handle it. That assurance was put to the test one afternoon during a team meeting. Jenna was presenting a report when one of the junior managers, Dave, muttered something under his breath. Whatever he said made Jenna freeze mid-sentence, her face turning bright red. "What was that, Dave?" I asked, my voice sharp. The room went silent. "Nothing," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "No, you said something," I pressed, standing up. "Why don't you share it with the rest of us?" He smirked, clearly emboldened by the audience. "I said your wife looks good enough to be a model. Maybe she's in the wrong profession." Laughter rippled through the room. "I didn't think," I reacted. In one swift motion, I crossed the room and planted my fist squarely on his jaw. The sound of the impact silenced the laughter instantly. Dave crumpled to the floor, out cold. "Anybody else have something to say?" I asked, scanning the room. No one dared to make a sound. That incident earned me a reputation, and surprisingly, it didn't cost me my job. If anything, it seemed to amuse Richard. "Hell of a punch, Max," he said later, slapping me on the back. "Remind me not to piss you off." Jenna, on the other hand, was furious. "You can't keep solving problems with your fists," she said that night, pacing the living room. I sighed. "I'm not going to stand there while someone disrespects you. I don't regret it." "I don't need you to protect me," she snapped. "I can take care of myself." "Then why didn't you say something to him?" I countered. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. Jenna was strong, but she hated conflict. She'd rather brush things under the rug than face them head-on. I didn't blame her for it, but I wasn't wired that way. If someone crossed a line, I made damn sure they knew it. The night of the corporate party, everything felt off from the start. Jenna and I arrived late, and I could already tell Richard had been drinking. He was louder than usual, throwing his arm around people and cracking crude jokes. I stuck close to Jenna, not wanting to give him the opportunity to make her uncomfortable. But Richard was relentless. As the night went on, he found every excuse to hover near us, his eyes lingering on Jenna a little too long. I clenched my jaw, reminding myself that this was my boss. Losing my temper here could cost me everything. Then came the moment that shattered it all. "Your wife's spending the night with me," Richard announced, his voice dripping with arrogance. Jenna's face twisted in horror, and I felt my blood boil. "You're going to regret that," I said coldly. The rest played out like a scene from a movie. My fist connected with his jaw, and he went down hard. The room erupted in chaos, and Jenna pulled me away before security could step in. But as we stood outside in the cold night air, reality hit me like a freight train. Why didn't you tell me about him sooner? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. I thought I could handle it, she said, tears streaming down her face. What else haven't you told me, Jenna? I asked, my heart sinking. She didn't answer. That silence, that damn silence, was worse than any confession. The car ride home was suffocating. Jenna stared out the window, her arms crossed tightly, while I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Neither of us said a word, but the tension between us was louder than anything we could have said. My mind raced with 100 questions, each one darker than the last. Finally, as we pulled into the driveway, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Are you going to explain what the hell that was back there? Jenna unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move to get out. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't know what you want me to say, Max. I want the truth, I shot back. Why didn't you tell me Richard's been harassing you? And why the hell would he say something like that if there wasn't more to it? Her eyes flared with anger. You think I wanted this? Do you know how humiliating it was to hear that in front of everyone? And now you've made it worse by hitting him. So this is my fault now? I snapped, slamming my hand against the steering wheel. I was defending you. Defending me? You were showing off, she yelled. You don't think about consequences, Max. You just act. Her words hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. What's that supposed to mean? I asked, my voice low. She shook her head, opening the car door. I'm done talking about this tonight. Over the next few days, the tension between us didn't ease. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Jenna's silence than just anger or embarrassment. Something about her behavior felt off. She was jumpier than usual, and when I asked her about work, she brushed it off with vague answers. I decided to dig a little deeper. It wasn't something I was proud of, but my gut told me I needed to know more. Late one night, while Jenna was in the shower, I opened her laptop. At first, everything seemed normal. Emails, spreadsheets, the usual corporate stuff. But then I found a folder buried deep in her files. It was password protected, but curiosity and suspicion are powerful motivators. After a few failed attempts, I tried our anniversary date. It opened. Inside were screenshots of text messages. Some were from Richard, creepy, flirtatious, and persistent. Others were from Jenna, mostly shutting him down, but a few replies made my stomach churn. One in particular stood out. I can't do this. You're my husband's boss. We can't risk it. Risk what? Before I could read more, the shower turned off. My heart raced as I quickly closed the laptop and slipped back into bed. My mind was spinning. I wanted to believe she had shut him down completely, but that one message kept replaying in my head. The next morning, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Jenna was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, when I walked in. I didn't ease into it. Why didn't you tell me Richard was texting you? Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Jenna. I saw the messages. The ones you saved on your laptop. Her face drained of color. You went through my files? I had to, I said, my voice rising. Because you've been hiding things from me. She set her coffee down, her hands shaking. It's not what you think, Max. Then explain it, I demanded. What did you mean when you told him, we can't risk it? Risk what? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't about to let her guilt trip me. I didn't do anything with him, she said softly. He kissed me once, months ago. I told him it was a mistake and that it couldn't happen again. My chest tightened. And you didn't think I deserved to know this? I didn't want to make things worse, she cried. You're so quick to throw punches, Max. I was scared you'd lose your job. You should have been scared about losing me, I shot back. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Later that day, I got a call from HR. They wanted me to come in for a discussion about the incident at the party. I wasn't surprised, but it still sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I knew I'd crossed a line, and now I was bracing for the consequences. When I arrived, the HR director was waiting for me, along with Richard. His jaw was bruised, but the smugness in his eyes made me want to punch him all over again. Max, the HR director began. We need to address what happened at the party. I was defending my wife, I said flatly. He disrespected her. Richard chuckled, wincing as he touched his jaw. Defending her? Or trying to cover up your own insecurities? I clenched my fists under the table. You've been harassing her for months. I've seen the messages. The HR director's eyebrows shot up. Is this true, Richard? He shrugged, feigning innocence. I have no idea what he's talking about. My blood boiled. Don't play dumb. You've been pushing boundaries, and everyone knows it. Hell, half the office probably has their own stories about you. The HR director looked uncomfortable. Richard, we take allegations like this very seriously. If there's any evidence— There is, I interrupted. Check her emails. She has the screenshots. Richard's smirk faltered for the first time. This isn't over, I said, standing up. Not by a long shot. I left that HR meeting with my heart pounding and anger bubbling just beneath the surface. As much as I hated Richard, the bigger problem gnawed at me, Jenna. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling me everything. Sure, she claimed she shut him down, but why save those messages? Why keep them hidden instead of coming clean? That evening, I confronted her again, determined to dig deeper. HR's investigating Richard, I said, dropping my bag near the door as I walked into the living room. Jenna looked up from the couch, her face unreadable. Good. Maybe they'll finally do something about him. I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. You should have gone to them months ago. Why didn't you? She sighed, rubbing her temples. You don't understand, Max. He's the boss. He could have made my life hell, made our lives hell. What if he fired you out of spite? I don't care about the job, I said sharply. I care about you lying to me. Her eyes filled with tears, and I hated how easily she could flip the narrative, making me feel like the bad guy. I wasn't lying. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? I scoffed. From what? The truth? She stood, pacing the room. You're not listening. He kissed me once, yes, but it wasn't my fault. I didn't encourage him. Then why did you keep texting him? I snapped. Why tell him? We can't risk it. That doesn't sound like someone shutting things down, Jenna. Her face turned pale, and for a moment, she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought if I handled it quietly, it would go away. I was trying to keep the peace. Bullshit, I said, stepping closer. You don't save messages for peace. You save them because you're hiding something. Her silence was deafening. The next day, HR followed up with me. They'd suspended Richard pending an investigation, and Jenna's emails were now part of the review. I thought it might give me some peace, but instead, it just left me restless. The waiting was torture. That night, while Jenna was asleep, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. The texts I found weren't from Richard. They were from a number I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through the messages, each one a dagger to the heart. I miss you. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Are you sure Max doesn't suspect anything? My hands were shaking. I scrolled further, finding pictures, selfies, some flirty, some downright explicit. Jenna wasn't just hiding Richard's harassment. She was hiding a full-blown affair. And it wasn't with Richard. It was with Dave, the same guy I'd knocked out months ago for making that crude comment about her. I waited until morning to confront her. There was no use waking her up in a rage. I needed her fully awake to hear every word. When she walked into the kitchen, yawning and reaching for her coffee, I slid her phone across the counter. Care to explain these? Her face froze as she looked down. She didn't even try to deny it. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. You've been cheating on me, I said, my voice deadly calm. With Dave, of all people. The guy I defended you against. The guy I knocked out for disrespecting you. Max, she started, but I cut her off. Don't. Just don't, I said, shaking my head. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, then finally muttered, a few months. My jaw clenched. A few months. While I was out here defending your honor, you were sneaking around with him. It wasn't like that, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. It just happened. We were working late one night and you thought that was a good excuse to screw him? I shouted, slamming my fist on the counter. You disgust me, Jenna. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she sobbed. I love you, Max. I made a mistake. Mistake? I laughed bitterly. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, not sleeping with someone behind your husband's back. Her betrayal felt like a punch to the gut, but the worst part was the way she tried to justify it. She kept saying she didn't want to hurt me, that it was a lapse in judgment. But the texts and photos told a different story. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was premeditated. She had been lying to my face for months. And then, as if the situation couldn't get worse, HR called me again. They'd uncovered more about Richard's behavior. Apparently, he'd been using company funds to cover personal expenses, including gifts for women he pursued. Jenna was on that list. I didn't accept anything from him, she insisted when I confronted her about it. He tried to give me things, but I turned them down. Sure you did, I said coldly. I'm supposed to believe that now? The final blow came a week later, when I ran into Dave at the office. He had the nerve to smirk at me like he'd won some prize. Before I could stop myself, I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. You think this is funny? I snarled. Relax, man, he said, holding up his hands. It's not my fault she came to me. That was all it took. My fist connected with his face, and he dropped like a sack of bricks. Security dragged me out of the building, and I didn't care. I was done. Done with the job, done with the lies, and done with Jenna. I spent the night at a cheap motel, staring at the cracked ceiling, trying to make sense of my life. Just days ago, I had a steady job, a seemingly happy marriage, and a clear future. Now, all I had was rage, betrayal, and a gnawing emptiness in my chest. Jenna had called and texted nonstop since I walked out, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was there to say? Every time I thought about her and him, I felt like punching something, or someone, all over again. By morning, I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living like this. I needed answers. I needed closure. When I walked into the house, Jenna was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept, but I didn't care. This wasn't about her anymore. Are you finally ready to talk? She asked softly, her voice trembling. I didn't sit. I didn't even take off my coat. Talk? Sure. Let's talk about how long you've been screwing Dave behind my back. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Max, don't cry, I snapped. You don't get to cry. You don't get to play the victim here. I want answers, Jenna. Why? Why him? She wiped her face, her hands shaking. I don't know. It just happened. We were working late, and we started talking. He made me feel. Don't you dare say he made you feel something I couldn't. I cut her off, my voice rising. I've done everything for you. Everything. And this is how you repay me? I know I messed up, she whispered. I was stupid and selfish, and I hate myself for it. But I never stopped loving you. Love? I laughed bitterly. You call this love? You humiliated me, Jenna, in front of everyone. You made me think I was crazy for defending you when the real problem was you. She looked away, her shoulders slumping. I don't know how to fix this. You can't, I said coldly. It's too late for that. That afternoon, I met with HR one last time to finalize the fallout from the party. Richard was officially terminated. Between the harassment claims and the financial misconduct, there was no way they could keep him. But the meeting wasn't just about Richard. Max, the HR director, began, her expression apologetic. Given the physical altercation with Dave, we're going to have to let you go as well. We can't tolerate violence in the workplace. I expected it, but it still hit like a punch to the gut. Fine, I said, standing up. I don't want to work in this place anymore anyway. As I left the building for the last time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The job was gone. My marriage was crumbling. But for the first time in weeks, I felt free. I should have walked away from the mess entirely, but something inside me wouldn't let it go. Dave had humiliated me not once but twice, first with Jenna and then with his smug attitude. I wasn't looking for a fight when I saw him in the parking lot that evening, But I wasn't about to back down either. "Max," he said, smirking as he leaned against his car. "You still mad? Let it go, man. She wasn't happy with you. Not my fault." My vision blurred with rage. Before I knew it, I had him by the collar again, slamming him against his car. "You think this is funny?" I growled, my voice low and dangerous. He grinned, even as blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "You're predictable, you know that? Always solving your problems with your fists. No wonder she wanted something else." The words cut deeper than I expected, but instead of hitting him again, I let him go. "You're not worth it," I said, stepping back. "Enjoy your win, Dave. It's the last one you'll get." That night, I packed a bag. Jenna tried to stop me, begging me to stay and work things out, but I couldn't. The trust was gone, shattered into pieces I didn't have the energy to pick up. "I can't do this," I said, standing at the door. "You broke us, Jenna, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you." "Please," she sobbed, grabbing my arm. "We can go to therapy. We can fix this." I shook my head, pulling away. Some things can't be fixed. As I drove away, the weight on my chest felt both crushing and strangely liberating. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found a small gym where I could train and teach boxing, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't the corporate ladder, but it was honest work, and it reminded me of who I used to be, someone strong, focused, and in control. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, I sat in the empty gym, staring at the ring. My phone buzzed with a message from Jenna. "I'm sorry. I'll always love you." I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that loving someone wasn't always enough. Sometimes, you had to love yourself more. The first few months after leaving Jenna were a haze of anger, regret, and relentless self-doubt. I poured everything I had into the gym, training until my muscles screamed and teaching others how to fight. Boxing had always been my sanctuary, and now it was the only thing that kept me grounded. But the nights were the worst. Alone in a tiny apartment, I couldn't escape the replay of every betrayal, every mistake. It wasn't until I took on a young trainee named Ethan that things began to shift. He reminded me of myself at his age. Raw talent, too much anger, and a chip on his shoulder the size of a boulder. Training him became a way to focus on something other than my own pain. One night after practice, as we sat on the edge of the ring, Ethan asked, "Coach, why'd you stop competing? You could have gone pro, right?" I hesitated, the familiar sting of regret surfacing. "Life got in the way," I said simply. "Made some choices I can't take back." Ethan nodded like he understood, but his next words caught me off guard. "You ever think about starting over? Like, fixing what went wrong?" I laughed bitterly. "Sometimes, kid, but some things are too broken to fix." I was starting to feel like myself again when the first bomb dropped. One afternoon, I got a call from an old colleague, Sam, who still worked at the company. "Max, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice buzzing with urgency. "Richard's suing the company." "What?" I barked, gripping the phone tighter. "For what?" "Unlawful termination," Sam explained. "Apparently, he's claiming the harassment allegations were fabricated, and get this, he's saying you assaulted him without provocation." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He's delusional. They have the emails, the investigation?" Sam hesitated. "Yeah, but he's spinning it. Claims he's the victim of a smear campaign. And since you're not there to defend yourself, he's using you as part of his narrative." It felt like someone had poured gasoline on the embers of my rage. Richard wasn't just a predator. He was a manipulative bastard who couldn't accept the consequences of his actions. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Come forward," Sam said. "Tell HR everything. If we can get enough people to back up the claims, maybe we can shut this down." As much as I hated the idea of diving back into that mess, I couldn't let Richard rewrite the story. I dug out the screenshots I'd copied from Jenna's laptop and arranged a meeting with HR. Walking back into that office felt surreal, like stepping into the scene of a crime. The HR director, Lisa, greeted me with a mix of relief and hesitation. "Thank you for coming, Max. We really need your perspective." I laid everything out. The texts, the harassment, even the affair with Dave. Lisa's face tightened with every detail, but when I mentioned the gifts Richard had tried to give Jenna, she leaned forward. Wait, she said. You said he bought her gifts? Yeah, I replied. She said she didn't accept them, but Lisa pulled up a file on her computer. We've been auditing Richard's expenses. There are several charges that align with what you're describing, jewelry, spa packages, even a hotel stay. But he claimed they were for business clients. My stomach turned. Hotel stay? Lisa nodded grimly. We didn't have a name attached to it, but if Jenna was involved, I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I'd believed Jenna when she said the affair was just with Dave. But what if there was more? What if Richard wasn't just a creep? What if he'd been telling the truth about her flirting with him? That night, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation with Lisa. The idea of Jenna lying about Richard, not just about rejecting his advances, but about being complicit, made me sick. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was piling up. Desperate for answers, I called Jenna. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. Max? We need to talk, I said, and I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. There was a long pause. About what? About Richard. About the gifts. About the hotel. My voice cracked with frustration. Were you involved with him too? Her sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. Max, Don't lie to me, Jenna. I shouted. Not again. I didn't sleep with him, she cried. But I wasn't honest about everything. He bought me things, and I let him. I thought if I kept him happy, he'd leave me alone. My chest tightened. And the hotel? What about that? She hesitated again. He booked it after the holiday party. I didn't go. I swear. I wanted to believe her, but the damage was done. Every word felt like another twist of the knife. As if things couldn't get worse, Dave showed up at the gym a few days later. I was in the middle of training when I saw him standing by the door, looking smug as ever. What the hell are you doing here? I demanded, walking toward him. Relax, he said, holding up his hands. I'm not here to fight. Just wanted to talk. You've got 2 minutes, I growled. He smirked. I heard about Richard's lawsuit. Thought you might need some backup. I narrowed my eyes. Why the hell would I want help from you? Because, he said, leaning against the wall, I know things. Things that could bury Richard. I crossed my arms, skeptical. Like what? Like the fact that Jenna wasn't the only one he was chasing, Dave said. He's been pulling this crap for years. You think Jenna's the first? She's just the one who turned him down the hardest. That's why he came after you so hard. He was pissed he couldn't have her. I hated that he was right, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook. And what about you? Why should I trust you? Dave shrugged. You don't have to. But if you want to take him down, you're gonna need all the help you can get. Staring at Dave, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. He wasn't someone I wanted to trust, or even be around. But the opportunity to take Richard down was too good to ignore. I clenched my fists, my instinct screaming to knock him out again. But my brain told me to play it smart. Start talking, I said finally, my voice low and tense. Dave smirked, clearly enjoying the moment. Richard's got skeletons, Max. More than you realize. But he's smart about covering his tracks. If you want to beat him, you'll need leverage. What kind of leverage? I asked, narrowing my eyes. His list, Dave said, his tone dropping. He keeps track of every woman he's tried to seduce. Texts, photos, even videos. It's his insurance policy. If someone tries to come after him, he uses it against them. A chill ran down my spine. You're telling me he's been blackmailing people? Dave nodded. Not just women. Anyone who crosses him. That's why he's been untouchable for so long. Where's the list? I asked, my mind racing. His personal laptop, Dave said. Good luck getting it, though. He keeps it locked up tighter than Fort Knox. After Dave left, I sat alone in the gym, weighing my options. If Richard had a list like Dave said, it could blow everything wide open. Not just the harassment, but the corruption and manipulation that had allowed him to thrive for so long. But breaking into Richard's laptop wasn't exactly legal. If I got caught, it could backfire spectacularly. On the other hand, I was already out of a job and had nothing left to lose. The next day, I reached out to Sam, the one colleague I still trusted. When I explained the situation, he was skeptical at first, but eventually came around. "You're insane, Max," he said, pacing his living room. "If HR finds out about this, we're both screwed." "Only if we get caught," I replied. "And if we don't, we can finally take him down." Sam sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, I'll help, but this better work." Sam and I spent the next week planning. Richard was predictable in his habits, which worked to our advantage. He often left his office unattended during lunch, and Sam still had access to the building. The plan was simple. Sam would distract the receptionist, and I'd sneak in to grab the laptop. The day of the break-in, my nerves were shot. As I slipped into the building, dressed like a delivery guy to avoid suspicion, I felt my heart pounding like a drum. Sam gave me the all-clear over the phone, and I crept into Richard's office. His desk was spotless, but the laptop was there, just as we'd hoped. I grabbed it and slipped it into my bag, then headed for the exit. My hands were slick with sweat, but I kept my face neutral as I passed the receptionist, who was laughing at one of Sam's terrible jokes. Back at my apartment, Sam and I booted up the laptop. As expected, it was password protected, but Sam had a trick up his sleeve, a USB key loaded with hacking software. After what felt like hours, the lock screen disappeared, and we were in. The folder Dave had mentioned was easy to find, labeled innocuously as expenses. Inside, we found everything: emails, text screenshots, compromising photos, and videos. It was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence, not just against Richard but against others he'd worked with. "Holy shit," Sam whispered. "This guy's a monster." Scrolling through the files, my stomach turned. The list of names was long, and Jenna's was there, along with notes Richard had written about each woman. Next to her name, he'd written, "resistant, attempted gifts, husband aggressive, target abandoned, too risky." I closed the laptop, while rising in my throat. Jenna hadn't been lying about rejecting him, but seeing it spelled out like that made it all feel so much worse. That night, I stared at the laptop, wondering what to do. Part of me wanted to take it straight to the authorities, but another part of me wanted to confront Richard face to face. He'd taken so much from me: my job, my peace of mind, my marriage. I wanted him to suffer. But then I thought about Ethan, the kid I'd been training, and the advice I'd given him about channeling anger. I couldn't let this consume me. If I wanted to move forward, I had to do things the right way. I called Lisa from HR the next morning. "I have something you need to see," I said. Lisa arranged a meeting with Richard under the guise of discussing his lawsuit. Sam and I were there, along with the company's legal team. When Richard walked in, his smug grin faded the moment he saw me. "What's this about?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. Lisa didn't waste time. "We've reviewed some new evidence regarding your conduct, Richard. Evidence that contradicts your claims in the lawsuit." She gestured to the laptop sitting on the table. Richard's face turned pale. "This is a violation of my privacy," he barked. "You can't use that against me." Lisa smiled coldly. "Actually, we can, and we will, unless you'd prefer to drop your lawsuit and resign quietly." Richard looked like he wanted to explode, but he knew he was cornered. After a long, tense silence, he stood. "This isn't over," he hissed, glaring at me. "Yeah, it is," I said, meeting his gaze. "You're done." With Richard's resignation making waves across the company, it felt like a massive weight had been lifted. Sam texted me the day after the announcement. "He's gone. Good riddance. HR's keeping the laptop for the legal case." I wanted to celebrate, but the truth was, the victory felt hollow. Richard was out, but the damage he'd caused, both professionally and personally, wasn't going away anytime soon. His absence didn't magically erase the mess of my life. 2 days after Richard's downfall, Jenna showed up at my apartment. I wasn't surprised. Her texts had been ramping up, alternating between apologies and pleas to talk. But I hadn't been ready to face her. Until now. I opened the door, and there she stood, looking exhausted. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore the oversized hoodie she used to borrow from me on lazy Sundays. Seeing her like that stirred something in me, but I pushed it down. What do you want, Jenna? I asked, keeping my voice even. She hesitated. I heard about Richard, she said softly. Sam told me what you did. I wanted to thank you. For what? Exposing him? Or proving you weren't lying about rejecting him? My tone was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. She flinched. Both, she admitted. I know I hurt you, Max, and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know how sorry I am. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. You think sorry is going to fix this? You lied to me, Jenna, over and over, and not just about Richard. I know, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I hate myself for what I did with Dave. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I shook my head, exhaling sharply. It wasn't just a mistake, Jenna. It was a choice. A choice you made every time you texted him, met him, lied to me about him. She started to cry, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. I don't know how to fix this, she said through her sobs. But I still love you, Max, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. For a moment, I thought about the years we'd spent together, the good times, the love we'd shared. But then I thought about the betrayal, the lies, the humiliation. I don't think we can come back from this, I said finally. Too much has happened. I can't trust you anymore, Jenna. And without trust, what's left? She didn't argue. She just nodded, wiping her tears as she turned to leave. Goodbye, Max, she said softly, and I watched her walk away. After Jenna left, I threw myself into the gym. Training Ethan became my full-time focus, and I started taking on more clients. It wasn't just about boxing anymore. It was about rebuilding my confidence, finding purpose, and creating a life outside the shadow of my past. Ethan's first amateur fight was a turning point for both of us. Watching him step into the ring, I saw a reflection of myself, young, determined, and ready to prove something. When he won, the pride I felt was like nothing I'd experienced in years. You did it, kid, I said, clapping him on the shoulder as he grinned from ear to ear. I couldn't have done it without you, coach, he replied. His words stuck with me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was making a difference, like I was finally moving forward. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee at a local cafe, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Megan, an old friend from college. We'd lost touch after graduation, but seeing her again felt like a ray of light breaking through the clouds. Max, she said, her eyes widening in surprise. Wow, it's been forever. I smiled, feeling a genuine warmth I hadn't felt in months. Megan, yeah, it has. We ended up talking for hours, catching up on everything from work to life to the crazy twists and turns we both experienced. She told me about her career as a freelance photographer, and I told her about the gym. By the time we parted ways, I realized I was smiling, a real smile, for the first time in what felt like forever. Over the next few weeks, Megan and I started seeing more of each other. She had a way of making me laugh, of reminding me what it felt like to enjoy life without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. But I wasn't rushing into anything. For now, it was enough to have someone to talk to, someone who made me feel like I could be myself again. Looking back, the past year had been the hardest of my life. I'd lost my job, my marriage, and my sense of stability. But I'd also gained something, clarity. I learned what mattered and what didn't. I learned how to fight for myself, not just in the ring, but in life. Richard was gone. Jenna was gone. And for the first time, I felt free. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, that didn't scare me. Because now, I knew I could face whatever came next, one round at a time.